Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, August 30th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the race for president and the 2028 presidential Democratic primary that's set to take place over the coming years as many Democrats look to their next moves as they fuel speculation that they were running for president and will run for president, all of these different things. Gavin Newsom seems to be the near universal winner here in recent news as Emerson College and many other sources show that Newsom's stock is rising. Now, Newsom surging ahead in the 2028 Democratic nomination contest is arguably no surprise. As someone who has gone tit for tat with Donald Trump on nearly every metric, including the most recent redistricting that he's set to take place through the state of California in a November 4th, 2025 vote, voters are paying attention. And Democrats who are looking for a leader in the day and age of not only being the anti-Trump, but the future after Donald Trump, Gavin Newsom is starting to do quite well, especially in comparison to recent data points that we've seen with Gavin Newsom's name invoked back in June of 2025. Emerson College has had their top three contenders here, who at the time of their June poll were Vice President Harris, Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and Governor Gavin Newsom. And so this race has in many ways been defined by these three candidates. Pete Buttigieg led the pack in June with 16% support. Kamala Harris came at second place with 13% support, and Gavin Newsom had 12% support. But now in the most recent August survey, Gavin Newsom skyrocketing, doubling his support nationwide to a whopping 25%, peeling off support away from those undecided voters and even some voters away from Vice President Harris, whereas Pete Buttigieg has remained roughly the same. And this gain is something that really does show that the way in which Gavin Newsom is maneuvering and navigating this space, again being anti-Trump, but also a vision of a future for Democratic politics beyond Donald Trump, is going to be quite interesting to see how many other Democrats do it, because clearly, at least, it is working for Newsom to reach his ultimate goal of being the Democratic nominee for president. And so thinking about Gavin Newsom and a hypothetical 2028 bid, the race has very much begun. No matter what, Newsom is going to remain a very constant and prominent presence in the Democratic Party, and it just so happens that his time as governor will end right before the 2028 campaign season really heats up. After the 2026 midterms, Gavin Newsom will leave office in January of 2027. Very often, candidates will announce that they run for president in January to May of the year before the election. So in 2019, we saw Joe Biden announced in April of 2019, Warren announced practically in December and January of 2018, 2019, very early on. And again, Gavin Newsom, who already is leveraging his position as governor of the nation's largest state, is using that and as a means to really build up his notability and build up the way that Democrats view him across this country. Now, Gavin Newsom being at 25% is something that I think is going to be a pretty constant presence in recent polling data. Gavin Newsom, who has been able to really capture this amount of support, even with a ballot with very big names, people like Tim Walz, who was the VP nominee in the last presidential election for the Democrats, Governor Josh Shapiro of the state of Pennsylvania, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Vice President Harris is there, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker. These are names that Democratic households know. They are household names of those who watch politics closely, who pay attention, and often are the voters in Democratic primaries. And yet, it is Gavin Newsom who leads in many of these data points. And a poll that was taken just right before by Morning Consult found Kamala Harris with a lead. But should she not run? It very much looks like Gavin Newsom is doing very well there. But either way, take aside the fact that Kamala Harris is leading. She's been leading in nearly every single 2028 hypothetical Democratic primary poll. But Gavin Newsom's numbers have only been rising. When we started this and Donald Trump had been inaugurated for the second time, Gavin Newsom was polling in single digits, 7%, 6%, and in some cases in the low single digits, 4%, 9%, 5%, 6%, 4%. But then again, he started building up a name for himself. Right after Texas decided that they wanted to do their redraw in the middle of the decade, Gavin Newsom really built up his persona. And now that, combined with the online social strategy that he's been adopting, the visibility for Gavin Newsom has increased tenfold. Truly speaking, you can track the amount of searches for Gavin Newsom and his policies and his time in office have completely gone up. And the whole thing about a presidential race is visibility. When you take a look at the candidates that might run in the Democratic primary, visibility is going to be everything. You have multiple governors open to the idea that they will run, multiple former secretaries, senators, representatives. You have a very long list of people: Cory Booker, Roy Cooper, Jasmine Crockett, Andrew Cuomo, Ruben Gallego. Again, these are all just speculated by the media. In no reality does Andrew Cuomo have a shot to become president of the United States. But again, thinking about how big these names are, the fact remains that with all of these names floated and constantly talked about by the press, Kamala Harris, Maura Healey, Mark Kelly, Amy Klobuchar, Chris Murphy, Phil Murphy, Gavin Newsom, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jon Ossoff, J.B. Pritzker, Jamie Raskin, Josh Shapiro, Raphael Warnock, and the list goes on and on and on, because some of those who said that they decline that they're running are absolutely going to run. Think about people like Gretchen Whitmer, who says, I'm not running in 2028. Well, you have a super PAC, or you have a political action committee, not a super PAC. You served as vice chair of the DNC. You were co-chair of Biden and Harris's reelect, and yet you say you're not going to run. No one believes that, right? And then that's the thing. It doesn't mean that there is anything about this that isn't just standard political practice. It makes sense when you are finishing out your term to focus on that and say, I'm not actively campaigning for president. So often Hillary Clinton in 2013 said she was not going to run for president. Well, we all know how that turned out 2 years later. And this is not a criticism of people who aren't out there and saying that they're not running for those who are saying that they're not running for president. I absolutely do think there is time for people to make names for themselves. But clearly Gavin Newsom, who started out in the polling data, in some cases in the low single digits and peaking at 7 or 8% support, is now standardly going up against Vice President Harris, Pete Buttigieg, all these top names, and all of the ones I've mentioned, and yet somehow, in the most recent Emerson College poll, 1 out of 4 Democratic voters say, I'm with Gavin Newsom. And so that's what I think really goes to show how effective this strategy has been. Agree with him or not, want him to be the nominee or not, it is clear he is winning the media battle, he is winning the online battle. He is winning this redistricting battle and the battle and this appetite that is being satisfied in part by Newsom of Democratic voters who are looking to their elected officials and saying, how are you fighting against Trump? How are you going up toe-to-toe, and how are you making the case to the American public that you would be the right person for the job in the future? These are very real questions that Democratic voters have felt that they have not been able to get answers from. Maybe it's on the side of congressional leadership that they're disaffected with. Maybe it's on the side of their local and statewide leadership. These are things that people have real and genuine questions about. And thinking about the way in which Democrats have really been trying to navigate this process, a lot of Democrats have just simply not done it right. They haven't been able to capture in the sentiments in the way that now Gavin Newsom is learning how to do it. And thinking about the way that Donald Trump is going after him, the White House, he looks like public enemy number one. Gavin Newsom looks like from the outside to be Donald Trump and the Republican Party's biggest threat. And even though they are coast to coast, and Newsom is on one side of the world and Donald Trump is on the other, the way in which it comes across, whether through a media dynamic, whether online, whatever it is, Democratic voters are in many ways looking for the anti-Trump and the future beyond Trump. And as of now, it is Gavin Newsom who's filling that spot. Now, of course, this is a very standardly unconventional, early campaign season. Even in 2017, John Delaney was the first Democrat to announce that he was running for president, and I don't think we'll see any formal announcements as early as 3 years out. But what I do think that did was sort of oriented our understanding of the presidential race, because John Delaney didn't even make it through Iowa, right? All the way up until there and then dropped out because there was no viability, even though he had been running for president constantly and always, had been seeking top talent for his campaign, had announced and been on the major headways by announcing this campaign so early on. He felt as if by announcing 3 years out, it would give him a better chance at winning the election. But it didn't. But Gavin Newsom is certainly no John Delaney, and vice versa, right? These are two very incomparable candidates. Gavin Newsom does come in to the 2028 race with already high name ID and even higher name ID now. And so what this does is it now makes it so a lot of other Democrats who may want to run have to build up their name ID and notability as well, because Gavin Newsom, quite frankly, isn't going anywhere. his case to be made to the Democratic public is still being made. Not all of the voters who would consider voting for Gavin Newsom have locked in their support for him. And that's something that should worry other Democrats if they look to the 2028 race as something that they want to contend with. Because Gavin Newsom being at 12% in June of 2025, there were a lot of think pieces about Gavin Newsom and whether or not he can or should be president. These are things that still go on today. People talk about it and are very much confronting this reality that Gavin Newsom is starting out, if Vice President Harris does not enter into the race, as the clear frontrunner in this race. Not Pete Buttigieg, not AOC, right? Not Cory Booker, not all of these names that everyone swore up and down would be right there as the mainstream candidates. Yes, they are mainstream candidates. And yes, they do have viable shots at becoming the Democratic nominee. But Gavin Newsom, again, what the data is saying is that he is expanding on this lead. And he is doing it in a way that many people simply cannot. And if he continues, which I'm telling you he will, if he continues this, this big personality, this presence of sorts that is resonating with the base, his numbers are only going to increase. In just about 2 months, he has gone from the data back in June, showing him at 8% in early June, to now where he's at 25% in the most recent Emerson College poll, which nailed the New York City mayoral primary, which has nailed multiple other races before. And even if anything is an indication that a Democratic sample can find itself that split across 10 plus candidates, 1 out of 4 voters want Gavin Newsom in that circumstance. And even the data, Echelon Insights puts him in second place. The first August poll we saw released bumped to second place. Then Morning Consult bumped up even higher. Now Emerson College has him in first place, where Gavin Newsom on the aggregate is just a quarter of a percentage point away from overtaking Kamala Harris on the average. That is fascinating, if you ask me. And it goes to show that what we have seen here with Newsom at the front runner status, or not even, guaranteed front runner status, but if he gets there, is that is only going to encourage his team and himself to continue doing this. And as he builds out more name ID, he is more and more likely to garner votes early on. Because what that early lead does, and has done historically, I want to go back to 2016 to show you how effective early leads can be, because it did eventually lead to Hillary Clinton winning the Democratic nomination we can find here in the Democratic presidential primaries, had all the way down to polling. Early on in the race, Hillary Clinton's tremendous lead kept her and maintained her average on the national stage. No matter how you cut it, Hillary Clinton was always going to win that 2016 Democratic primary because she had such strong support from a lot of voters across the country, right? Even if you are looking at it from the perspective of who received more help from the establishment and superdelegates, that's a different argument. But taking a look at these data points from 2013, who was it that led early on? It wasn't Bernie Sanders, it was Hillary Clinton, who garnered more and more support as she floated and opened up to the idea that she was going to run for president. And obviously this had been, the worst kept secret out of Washington, D.C., that Hillary Clinton was going to run for president. But this lead early on had already warmed up and encouraged a lot of voters to consider her when it actually became a reality of Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders. And even when the going got going and the numbers got really tough and Bernie Sanders started to rise in the data points, she still was able to win. And she was able to maintain itself throughout the election. But by the time she reached the end of the nomination process in the Democratic primary, she received 55.2% of the vote, and that is enough to win. And the lead had been so insurmountable in the early data that many other Democrats decided not to enter into the race. And when looking at the 2028 presidential election, not saying that Gavin Newsom is Hillary Clinton, I don't think that, any Democrat would want that comparison to be made, because that's an entirely separate set of questions. Gavin Newsom right now, though, as he builds up the way in which voters perceive him, how many voters perceive him, and what they perceive him for, is only helping his campaign. Because he has been governor since 2019, and yet it is only recently that practically a quarter of this country is starting to know him for what they know and like him for, and that is being oppositional to Donald Trump. Gavin Newsom had 2 years of a Trump presidency to build out this name ID, but his aspirations looked further in the future. And now it seems to be benefiting him. And so based off what we're seeing, again, Gavin Newsom seems to be satisfying a huge appetite within the Democratic Party base that is looking for a figure who can be, again, oppositional to Trump and the future without him. And right now, it is Gavin Newsom who is filling that void. And whether or not other Democrats will be able to tap into that is yet to be seen. And chances are Gavin Newsom will have a very competitive 2028 race. By no means is this a said and done for primary 3 years out. But it does show him with an early advantage, and it doesn't look like he's going to let up anytime soon. And so I'd be interested to see what these data points look like in a year from now, in 2 years from now, because Gavin Newsom starting out with 25% support is a lot better than 12% where he was 2 months ago. Who knows where he'll be in about 2 months from today, especially when we're going into the height of the California campaign season this coming November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2028 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.